The howl of the wind across the Nebraska plains carried more than just dust on that fateful morning in 1869. It carried destiny. Lucas O'Malley pulled his hat down tighter against the gale as he rode through the outskirts of Fort Kearny, a town that had never meant to be more than a passing place in his wandering life. His weathered face told stories of 32 hard years on the frontier, each line carved by sun and sorrow, each scar a memory he'd rather forget. The Civil War had ended 4 years prior, but Lucas still carried the battlefield inside him, a private war that kept him moving west, away from everything and everyone. "Come on, Rusty," he murmured to his chestnut quarter horse. "Just supplies and we're gone." The animal nickered as if in agreement. Fort Kearny had grown since Lucas had last passed through. Once merely a military outpost protecting travelers on the Oregon Trail, it now boasted a proper main street with a general store, a saloon that looked less likely to collapse than the previous one, and even a small schoolhouse at the far end of town. Progress, Lucas thought wryly. Soon enough, the West wouldn't need men like him any more, men who lived by their wits and their guns, who knew the language of the open plains better than the language of parlors and politics. Lucas tied Rusty to the hitching post outside Harrington's general store, his boots kicking up dust as he stepped onto the wooden sidewalk. The bell above the door announced his arrival, and the shopkeeper nodded in recognition. "Mr. O'Malley, been a while." "Harrington." Lucas touched the brim of his hat. "Just passing through. Need some coffee, ammunition, and jerky if you've got it." The shopkeeper moved around the counter, gathering the requested items. "Headed anywhere particular?" "West," Lucas answered, offering nothing more. As Harrington wrapped the purchases, the door opened again, and a young boy of about 6 burst in, all energy and excitement. "Mr. Harrington, Ma says to add sugar to our order if you got any fresh in." "Easy there, Danny," the shopkeeper chuckled. "Tell your ma that sugar shipment came in yesterday. She's in luck." The boy grinned, revealing a missing front tooth before turning his attention to Lucas. His eyes widened at the sight of the cowboy's worn leather holster and the revolver it housed. "Are you a real gunslinger, mister?" Lucas stiffened. "No, son, just a man passing through." "Danny," a woman's voice called from outside. "Don't be bothering strangers now." The boy reluctantly backed toward the door. "Yes, Ma." Lucas caught only a glimpse of the woman through the window, a flash of auburn hair and a blue calico dress, before returning his attention to his purchases. He paid Harrington, nodded his thanks, and stepped back into the harsh sunlight, eager to be on his way. His path to his horse brought him face to face with the woman who'd called for the boy. She stood with her hand on Danny's shoulder, and up close, Lucas could see she was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 26 or 27. Her face bore the marks of someone who'd known hardship, yet there was a gentle determination in her eyes that caught him off guard. "I apologize if my son was troubling you," she said, her voice carrying the hint of an Eastern accent that time in the West hadn't fully erased. "No trouble, madam." Lucas touched his hat again, a habit ingrained by a mother he barely remembered. She nodded, seeming relieved. "I'm Zara Taylor. This is my son, Daniel." Lucas hesitated, unused to introductions and the obligations they created. "Lucas O'Malley," he finally offered, shifting his supplies to his left arm so he could tip his hat properly. "You passing through Fort Kearny, Mr. O'Malley?" she asked. "Yes, madam, just stocking up before heading on." The boy tugged at his mother's skirt. "Ma, can we go see if Mr. Harrington has any of those peppermint sticks?" Zara smiled down at her son. "If you behave and don't pester him while he's working." She looked back at Lucas. "Well, safe travels, Mr. O'Malley." Lucas watched them enter the store, a strange sensation settling in his chest. It had been a long time since he'd exchanged more than necessary words with anyone, let alone a woman and child. Pushing the encounter from his mind, he mounted Rusty and guided him down the main street, leaving Fort Kearny behind. The open prairie welcomed him with its vast silence. This was where Lucas belonged, not in towns with their noise and expectations, but in the wild spaces where a man could breathe. He made camp as the sun began to set, the familiar routine of caring for his horse, building a small fire, and preparing a simple meal centering him once again. As darkness fell, Lucas leaned against his saddle and watched the stars appear, one by one, in the vast Nebraska sky. Tomorrow he'd continue west, perhaps toward Wyoming territory. There was nothing holding him to any place, and that was exactly how he preferred it. Morning brought fog rolling across the plains, unusual for this time of year. Lucas packed up camp quickly, uneasy about the limited visibility. Experience had taught him that surprises rarely favored the unprepared. He rode cautiously, letting Rusty pick his way forward as landmarks faded into the murky whiteness. The sound reached him first, a child's frightened cry, followed by a woman's urgent calling. Lucas reined Rusty toward the sound, his hand instinctively moving to his revolver. As he drew closer, the fog thinned enough for him to make out shapes ahead, a small wagon, a horse stamping nervously, and a woman pacing frantically at the edge of what appeared to be a muddy depression in the ground. "Help!" The woman's voice carried clearly now. "Please help us." Lucas urged Rusty forward, recognizing Zara Taylor as he approached. Her face was streaked with tears and mud, her hair escaping its pins in wild disarray. "Mr. O'Malley," relief and desperation mingled in her voice. "Thank God, it's Danny, he's stuck." Lucas dismounted swiftly, following her gesturing hand to where the boy was partially submerged in what Lucas immediately recognized as quicksand. Only the child's upper torso and arms remained visible, his face pale with terror as he struggled to keep still. "Don't move, Danny," Lucas called firmly, assessing the situation. The boy had wandered into a deceptively dry-looking patch that had revealed its true nature only when his weight had broken through the surface crust. "I can't get to him," Zara explained frantically. "I tried, but the ground started giving way under me too." Lucas nodded, quickly removing his gun belt and heavy coat. "I need rope," he said, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. Zara rushed to the wagon and returned with a length of rope. Lucas tested its strength, then tied one end securely around his waist and handed the other end to Zara. "Tie this to the wagon," he instructed. "If I start sinking, you pull with everything you've got." Fear flashed in her eyes, but she nodded and did as he asked, securing the rope firmly to the wagon frame. Lucas approached the edge of the quicksand carefully, testing each step. "Danny," he called, "I'm coming to get you, but you need to stay very still. Don't fight against it, that only makes you sink faster." The boy's eyes were wide with terror, but he managed a small nod. Lucas lay flat at the edge, distributing his weight over the surface as much as possible. The quicksand felt cold and gritty against his hands as he began to pull himself forward on his stomach, inching closer to Danny. The ground beneath him trembled ominously with each movement. "That's it, just stay calm," he encouraged the boy, who was now visibly shaking with the effort of remaining still. "I'm almost there." When Lucas was within arm's reach of Danny, he carefully extended his hand. "Grab hold, son. Nice and easy now." Danny stretched his arm, his small fingers straining toward Lucas's outstretched hand. Their fingertips brushed, then connected, and Lucas grasped the boy's wrist firmly. "I've got you," he assured him. Now I'm going to pull very slowly. The sand will try to hold on to you, but don't fight it. Lucas began the painstaking work of extracting the child from the quicksand's grip. Each tug was carefully measured, allowing the viscous mixture to release its hold gradually rather than creating suction that would pull them both deeper. Danny whimpered but remained impressively still for a child his age. "You're doing great," Lucas encouraged him. "Just a little more." With agonizing slowness, Danny's body began to emerge from the quicksand. When his chest was free, Lucas gave a stronger pull, and suddenly the boy came loose with a wet, sucking sound. Lucas wrapped his arm around Danny's small body and began the careful process of reversing his path, dragging them both back towards solid ground. "Pull the rope now, Mrs. Taylor," he called, and immediately felt the tension as Zara hauled on the line with all her might. The combination of her pulling and his careful movements brought them inch by inch toward safety. Finally, Lucas felt firm ground beneath his elbows, then his chest, and with one last effort he rolled himself and Danny clear of the quicksand's edge. Zara rushed forward, gathering her mud-covered son into her arms with a sob of relief. "Danny." "Oh, thank God, she repeated, pressing kisses to his dirty forehead. Lucas lay on his back for a moment, catching his breath, his clothes soaked and heavy with mud. When he finally sat up, Zara was looking at him with an expression of such profound gratitude that it made him uncomfortable. "Mr. O'Malley," she said, her voice breaking, "you saved my son's life. I don't know how I can ever thank you enough." Lucas shook his head, rising stiffly to his feet. "Any man would have done the same. But you were the one who was here," she insisted, still holding Danny tightly against her. "We were heading to Elm Creek to my sister's place when the fog rolled in. We must have strayed from the trail." Lucas looked at their small wagon and the nervous horse still hitched to it. "You're traveling alone." A shadow passed over Zara's face. "My husband died last winter, pneumonia. I've been trying to keep our small farm going, but—" She trailed off, glancing down at Danny, who was beginning to shiver in the morning air. "It's been difficult." Lucas nodded, understanding more than he wanted to. Loss had a way of forcing hard choices on people. "Let's get you both cleaned up and warm," he said gruffly. "There's a creek not far from here where you can wash off the worst of it." Relief flooded Zara's features. "Thank you. Again." Lucas retrieved a blanket from his saddlebags and wrapped it around Danny before helping them both onto their wagon seat. He mounted Rusty and led them to the small creek he'd passed earlier that morning. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing a clear blue sky that promised warmth later in the day. At the creek, Lucas busied himself building a small fire while Zara helped Danny wash away the mud and change into dry clothes she pulled from a trunk in the wagon. Lucas kept his back turned, offering them privacy, focusing instead on boiling coffee in his battered tin pot. When they joined him by the fire, Danny was wrapped in a quilt, his hair damp but his face clean. The boy regarded Lucas with a mixture of awe and lingering fear. "Thank you for saving me, Mr. O'Malley," he said solemnly. Lucas nodded, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "You were brave out there. Most grown men would have panicked." A tiny smile appeared on Danny's face, and Lucas was struck by how it transformed him from a frightened child to a boy on the verge of mischief. There was a resilience there that reminded Lucas of himself at that age before life had taught him that resilience came at a cost. Zara accepted the cup of coffee Lucas offered her, their fingers brushing momentarily. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along," she said quietly. "Best not to think about that," Lucas advised, pouring a cup for himself. "You said you're heading to Elm Creek," Zara nodded. "My sister Judith and her husband have a place there. They've offered to take us in until I can." She hesitated, glancing at Danny, who was now examining a beetle crawling near his foot. Until I can figure out what comes next. Lucas considered their situation. Elm Creek was at least 2 days' journey, and the trail could be treacherous in places, especially for a woman traveling alone with a young child. After what had just happened, he couldn't in good conscience send them on their way. "I'll escort you," he found himself saying, surprising even himself with the offer. Zara's eyes widened. "I couldn't ask that of you. You said you were heading west." "West will still be there," Lucas replied with a shrug. "And Elm Creek isn't that far out of my way." It was a lie. Elm Creek would take him east, not west, but he told himself it was just temporary. A few days, then he'd be on his way again. Gratitude and relief mingled in Zara's expression. "I can pay you," she offered. "Not much, but no need," Lucas cut her off. "Let's just get you to your sister safely." He stood, effectively ending the conversation. "We should move out while we have good daylight." They packed up quickly, extinguishing the fire and loading the few items they'd used back into the wagon. Lucas helped Danny onto the wagon seat beside his mother, noticing how the boy's expression had shifted from fear to a kind of cautious excitement. "Are you a real cowboy, Mr. O'Malley?" Danny asked as Lucas prepared to mount Rusty. Lucas paused. "I suppose I am, among other things." "Pa used to tell me stories about cowboys," Danny continued. "He said they're the bravest men on earth." Lucas met Zara's gaze over the boy's head and saw the quiet sorrow there. "Your pa sounds like a wise man," he said gently to Danny. "He was," the boy replied simply. As they set out, Lucas rode slightly ahead, scouting the trail and keeping watch for any potential dangers. The morning's fog had given way to brilliant sunshine, and the Nebraska prairie stretched out around them, a sea of tall grasses punctuated by wildflowers. Despite the circumstances, it was a beautiful day to be alive, a thought Lucas couldn't remember having in a very long time. By midday, they'd made good progress. Lucas called a halt near a stand of cottonwoods that provided welcome shade. While Zara prepared a simple meal from her provisions, Lucas tended to the horses, ensuring they were watered and had a chance to graze. "Mr. O'Malley." Danny's voice came from behind him as he was checking Rusty's hooves. "Ma says to tell you lunch is ready." Lucas straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. "Thank you, Danny." The boy didn't leave but stood watching him with curious eyes. "How'd you know what to do with the quicksand?" Lucas considered the question. "I've been traveling these lands for many years." "You learn to read the signs to know what dangers to look for. Could you teach me?" There was earnestness in the request that caught Lucas off guard. "I don't think your ma would want you anywhere near quicksand again," Lucas replied. "Not just that," Danny explained. "Everything. How to be like you." The simple statement hit Lucas with unexpected force. This boy, looking up at him with admiration, had no idea of the demons that drove him, the choices he regretted, the life he'd left behind. Being like him was the last thing Lucas would wish on anyone, especially a child with his whole future ahead of him. "There are better men to learn from, Danny," he said quietly. "Men like your pa." Danny's face clouded. "I don't remember him so good anymore, just bits and pieces." Lucas felt a familiar ache in his chest, the pain of memories fading, of faces becoming less distinct with the passage of time. He'd lost his own father young, though to a bullet rather than illness. The wounds were different, but the absence felt the same. "Come on," he said, resting a hand lightly on Danny's shoulder. "Let's not keep your mother waiting." They shared a simple meal of corn bread, dried apple slices, and jerky. Lucas noted how carefully Zara rationed the food, making sure Danny had the larger portion while she took less for herself. It was the quiet sacrifice of a parent, one Lucas recognized from his own childhood, when his mother had gone hungry to ensure he ate. "Tell me about your farm, Mrs. Taylor," Lucas said, partly to distract himself from these unwelcome memories and partly out of genuine curiosity. Zara brushed crumbs from her skirt. "It's not much. 20 acres outside Fort Kearney. My husband James inherited it from his uncle when we married 8 years ago. The soil is good, but the work." She sighed. "James and I managed it together, but since he's been gone, it's been too much. The mortgage is due, and I couldn't make the payment this month." "So you're leaving it behind?" Lucas asked. A flash of defensiveness crossed Zara's face. "I didn't have a choice. The bank would have taken it by winter anyway." She softened, looking at Danny, who was now exploring the edge of their small camp. "Judith wrote that her husband's business is doing well. They have space for us, and maybe I can find work in town." Lucas nodded, understanding the impossible choices poverty forced on people. "Your sister is fortunate to have a successful husband." "Yes," Zara agreed, though something in her tone suggested there was more to the story. "Judith married well. Edward owns the general store in Elm Creek and has investments in the railroad. They have a fine house in town. And they're expecting you." Judith sent money for the journey. "They know we're coming." Zara hesitated, "though I didn't write exactly when we'd arrive." Lucas raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Family dynamics weren't his concern. His job was simply to see them safely to Elm Creek, then continue on his way. They resumed their journey as the afternoon heat began to wane. Lucas noticed that Danny had grown quiet, his earlier excitement replaced by a thoughtful expression that seemed too mature for his young face. "Everything all right, Danny?" Lucas asked as they forded a shallow stream, Rusty walking alongside the wagon. The boy nodded. "Just thinking about Aunt Judith's house. Ma says it's real big with fancy furniture and carpets you can't step on with dirty boots." Lucas glanced at Zara, who was focusing intently on guiding the horse across the water. "Sounds like quite a place." "Ma says we have to be on our best behavior because Aunt Judith and Uncle Edward are proper folks," Danny continued. "Not like us country people." Zara flushed. "Danny, that's not exactly what I said." "But you did say we can't embarrass you in front of them," the boy persisted. Lucas saw the discomfort on Zara's face and understood immediately. She was proud but desperate, forced to seek charity from relatives who perhaps looked down on her circumstances. It was a humiliation many faced in hard times, but that didn't make it any easier to bear. "Sometimes," Lucas said casually to Danny, "folks with fancy houses forget the most important things in life aren't things at all." He caught Zara's grateful glance and nodded slightly in acknowledgement. They made camp that evening near a small grove of trees that provided both firewood and shelter from the wind that had picked up as the sun set. Lucas helped Zara set up a makeshift tent, using a tarp from her wagon, ensuring she and Danny would have protection if the weather turned during the night. After a supper of beans and the last of the cornbread, Danny fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's events. Lucas and Zara sat quietly by the fire, the crackling flames the only sound between them for several minutes. "He likes you," Zara finally said, nodding toward her sleeping son. "He hasn't taken to anyone like this since James died." Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "He's a good boy." "Yes, he is," Zara's voice softened with maternal pride. "But it's been hard on him. Children need a father." Lucas stared into the fire, memories threatening to surface. "Some do fine without." "Did you?" The question was gentle, but it pierced through his defenses. Lucas looked up, surprised by her perception. "What makes you think I grew up without a father?" Zara met his gaze steadily. "Something in the way you look at Danny, like you understand him." For a moment, Lucas considered deflecting, changing the subject as he usually did when conversations turned personal. But there was something about the quiet night, the dancing flames, and Zara's patient expression that loosened his usual reserve. "My father was killed when I was 7, he said finally. "Shot during a dispute over cattle. My mother raised me alone until she remarried when I was 12. He paused, the memories bitter. "My stepfather wasn't a kind man. I left home at 16 and haven't been back since." Zara's face reflected compassion without pity, a distinction Lucas appreciated. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Lucas shrugged. "It was a long time ago." "Some wounds don't heal with time alone," she observed. The insight was uncomfortable in its accuracy. Lucas stood, needing distance from both the conversation and the woman's perceptiveness. "I'll check on the horses before turning in." Zara didn't try to stop him, merely nodding her understanding. As Lucas walked away from the firelight, he found himself unsettled by how easily she had seen through him. He'd spent years cultivating a detachment that kept others at a safe distance. Yet in less than a day, this woman had glimpsed parts of him he preferred to keep hidden. The horses were fine, of course, but Lucas took his time checking them anyway, using the mundane task to regain his composure. When he finally returned to the camp, Zara had retired to the makeshift tent with Danny. Lucas spread his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire, positioning himself where he could keep watch over both their camp and the trail. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by dreams he hadn't had in years, memories of his mother's tired smile, his father's booming laugh, the crack of his stepfather's belt. He woke before dawn, restless and on edge, and busied himself preparing coffee and rekindling the fire. Zara emerged from the tent as the first light of day touched the eastern horizon, her hair loosely braided and her face still soft with sleep. "Good morning," she said quietly, careful not to wake Danny, who still slumbered inside. "Morning," Lucas replied, handing her a cup of coffee. "We should reach Elm Creek by nightfall if we make good time." Zara nodded, accepting the cup gratefully. "Thank you for everything, Mr. O'Malley." "Lucas," he found himself saying. "Mr. O'Malley was my father." A small smile touched her lips. "Lucas then, and please call me Zara." It was a simple exchange, the kind that happened between travelers sharing a journey, but Lucas felt an unfamiliar warmth at the sound of his name on her lips. He turned away quickly, focusing on preparing for the day's travel. They were on the trail within the hour, Danny still yawning but cheerful, chatting about the adventures awaiting them in Elm Creek. Lucas rode ahead as before, but today he found himself glancing back more frequently, watching Zara's profile as she guided the wagon, noting the gentle way she corrected Danny when his excitement became too boisterous, the musical quality of her laughter when the boy said something amusing. The day passed pleasantly, the weather remaining clear and mild. They stopped for a brief lunch beside a small pond where wild ducks paddled lazily across the surface. Danny was delighted when Lucas showed him how to skip stones across the water, his triumphant shout when he finally managed it bringing an unexpected smile to Lucas's face. "I did it, Ma, did you see?" Danny called, turning to Zara, who was preparing their meal. "I saw." She confirmed, her face alight with pleasure at her son's joy. "You're a quick learner." "Mr. O'Malley, I mean. Lucas is a good teacher," Danny declared, puffing out his chest with pride. Lucas felt a peculiar tightness in his throat at the boy's words. He hadn't thought of himself as someone who could teach anything worth knowing, yet here was this child looking at him with undisguised admiration. "Your ma's right," Lucas said, ruffling Danny's hair lightly. "You're a natural." The afternoon brought them to more settled country, with occasional farmhouses visible in the distance, and the trail becoming a more defined road. Signs of civilization increased as they drew closer to Elm Creek fenced fields. a small church with a white steeple, and finally the town itself appearing on the horizon as the sun began its descent. Elm Creek was larger than Lucas had expected, with a proper main street lined with businesses, including the impressively fronted Taylor's General Merchandise that must belong to Zara's brother-in-law. The buildings were newer than those in Fort Kearny, many boasting fresh paint and glass windows that reflected the evening light. Lucas noticed Zara's posture stiffen as they entered the town limits, her hands tightening on the reins. Danny, too, seemed to sense the change, his exuberance subdued as he sat up straighter and smoothed his rumpled shirt. "Which house is your sister's?" Lucas asked, guiding Rusty alongside the wagon. Zara nodded toward the north end of town, where a large white house stood on a slight rise, its wraparound porch and ornate trim marking it clearly as one of the finest residences in Elm Creek. "That's it," she said, her voice tight. "The white one with the green shutters." Lucas took in the imposing structure, understanding now why Danny had spoken of carpets too fine for dirty boots. Edward Taylor had indeed done well for himself. As they approached the house, the front door opened, and a woman stepped onto the porch. Even at a distance, Lucas could see the family resemblance. Judith shared Zara's auburn hair, though hers was styled in an elaborate arrangement that spoke of leisure time and hired help. Her dress, too, was clearly expensive, the fabric catching the light as she moved. "Zara," she called, a note of surprise in her voice. "Is that you?" Zara drew the wagon to a halt at the bottom of the porch steps. "Hello, Judith. Yes, it's us. My goodness, why didn't you write to tell us when you were arriving?" Judith descended the steps, her gaze moving from Zara to Danny and finally landing on Lucas with undisguised curiosity. "And who is this?" "This is Lucas O'Malley," Zara explained, climbing down from the wagon. "He helped us on the journey. Lucas, my sister, Judith Taylor." Lucas tipped his hat politely. "Madam." Judith's expression was difficult to read, a mixture of surprise, assessment, and something that might have been disapproval. "How fortunate you had assistance," she said, her tone neutral. Danny scrambled down from the wagon, his earlier restraint forgotten in the excitement of arrival. "Aunt Judith, we had an adventure. I got stuck in quicksand and Lucas saved me." Judith's eyes widened. "Quicksand?" "Daniel, what on earth?" "It's a long story," Zara interrupted, placing a calming hand on her son's shoulder. "One best told after we've had a chance to rest and clean up." Of course," Judith agreed, seeming to remember her role as hostess. "Edward is away on business in Omaha but will return tomorrow. Please, come inside. Both of you," she added, with a nod to Lucas that seemed more obligation than genuine invitation. Lucas hesitated, suddenly aware of how out of place he would be in that fine house with his trail-worn clothes and unshaven face. "Thank you, but I should find accommodations in town." "Nonsense," Judith said with the confidence of a woman accustomed to having her way. "Any friend of Zara's is welcome in our home. We have plenty of space." Lucas looked to Zara, finding in her eyes a silent plea that he not leave yet. He nodded slightly, relenting. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Taylor." "Please call me Judith," she replied, though her tone suggested she did not expect him to take the liberty. "Now, let's get you all settled before supper." As they followed Judith up the steps, Lucas fell in beside Zara. "I won't impose for long," he said quietly. "Stay at least until morning," she whispered back. "Please. It would mean a lot to Danny. And to me." Lucas nodded, ignoring the voice in his head that warned him against further entanglement. One night, he told himself. He'd stay one night, ensure Zara and Danny were safely settled, and then continue on his way. That was all. The interior of the Taylor home was exactly as Lucas had imagined: elegant furnishings, polished woodwork, and indeed, fine carpets that his trailed, dusty boots seemed to desecrate with each step. A maid appeared, taking hats and directing them to rooms where they could freshen up before the evening meal. The guest room assigned to Lucas was larger than any space he'd occupied in years, with a proper bed featuring a carved headboard and linens so white they seemed to glow in the lamplight. He washed away the trail dust as best he could with the provided basin and clean water, uncomfortably aware of how his rough appearance contrasted with the refinement surrounding him. When he descended to the dining room, he found Zara and Danny already seated at a table set with silver and crystal that made the simplicity of their trail meals seem like a distant memory. Zara had changed into a clean dress, simple compared to Judith's finery, but becoming nonetheless. Her hair was neatly arranged, and for the first time, Lucas truly noticed how the copper highlights caught the light, how her green eyes brightened her entire face when she smiled in greeting. "There you are," Judith said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Please join us, Mr. O'Malley." Dinner was an elaborate affair by Lucas's standards: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from Judith's garden, all served by the same maid who had greeted them. The conversation flowed awkwardly at first, with Judith asking pointed questions about Zara's decision to leave Fort Kearney and making barely veiled references to the unfortunate circumstances that had brought her sister to seek refuge with her. "It's only temporary," Zara assured her, a hint of defensiveness in her tone, "until I can find suitable employment and a place of our own." Judith's eyebrows rose slightly. "Employment? Surely that won't be necessary. Edward and I have discussed it, and we believe it would be best if you and Daniel simply lived here with us. You could help manage the household, and Daniel would receive a proper education." Lucas saw Zara's fingers tighten around her fork. "That's very generous, Judith, but I've always supported myself. I don't intend to stop now." "Pride is a luxury, Zara," Judith said with a sigh. "Think of what's best for Daniel." Danny, who had been quietly eating his dinner and observing the adults, spoke up unexpectedly. "Ma takes real good care of me, Aunt Judith, and she's the strongest person I know." Zara's eyes shone with sudden tears, and Lucas felt a surge of admiration for both mother and son. "Of course she does, dear," Judith replied smoothly. "I simply meant that life could be easier for both of you here." The conversation shifted then to safer topics: local news, the growth of Elm Creek, plans for the town's upcoming harvest festival. Throughout the meal, Lucas found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Zara, noting the quiet dignity with which she navigated her sister's well-intentioned but condescending concern, the gentle patience she showed when Danny's table manners weren't quite up to Judith's standards. After dinner, they retired to the parlor where Judith insisted on demonstrating her new piano, a recent gift from Edward. As she played a complex piece that Lucas didn't recognize but assumed was fashionable in Eastern circles, he noticed Danny struggling to stifle yawns. "It's been a long day for the boy," Lucas said when Judith finished her performance. "Perhaps he should rest." Zara nodded gratefully. "You're right. Come, Danny, time for bed." "But I'm not tired," Danny protested even as another yawn betrayed him. "Tomorrow's another day," Lucas assured him. "You need your strength for new adventures." This reasoning seemed to satisfy Danny, who allowed his mother to lead him upstairs after bidding good night to Lucas and Judith. In their absence, an uncomfortable silence descended on the parlor. "You must think me terribly forward, Mr. O'Malley," Judith finally said, arranging her skirts as she sat on the sofa, "but I must ask, what exactly is your relationship with my sister?" Lucas stiffened. Mrs. Taylor, Zara, and I met by chance on the trail. I offered assistance, nothing more. Judith's gaze was shrewd. A lone cowboy just happens upon a widow and her son and decides to escort them to their destination out of the goodness of his heart. Something like that, Lucas replied evenly. Zara has always been impulsive, Judith continued. Marrying James Taylor against our parents' wishes, moving west to that God-forsaken farm. She sighed. I fear she's inherited our mother's romantic notions. Your sister strikes me as a practical woman doing her best in difficult circumstances, Lucas said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. And a fine mother. Judith studied him for a long moment. Yes, well, she's safely here now with family who can provide for her and Daniel properly. The implication was clear. Lucas's services were no longer required. I'll be moving on in the morning, he assured her. Something like relief crossed Judith's face. I'm sure you have pressing business elsewhere. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have household matters to attend to. She rose gracefully. Please make yourself comfortable. The maid will show you to your room whenever you're ready to retire. Left alone in the parlor, Lucas found himself restless and out of place among the delicate furnishings and ornaments that spoke of a settled life he'd never known. He stepped outside onto the porch, welcoming the cool night air and the familiar sight of stars overhead. He wasn't sure how long he'd been standing there when he heard the door open behind him. Turning, he found Zara stepping onto the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. Is Danny asleep? He asked. She nodded, coming to stand beside him at the porch railing. The moment his head touched the pillow, it's been quite a day for him. For all of you, Lucas observed. Zara sighed, her gaze fixed on the darkened town below. Judith means well. She always has, but she can't understand what it's like to struggle to lose everything you've worked for. She loves you, Lucas said, in her way. Yes, in her way. Zara turned to face him directly. Judith said you're leaving tomorrow. Lucas nodded. It's time. You're safe here, both of you. Where will you go? West, he answered simply. There's always work for a man who can handle horses and cattle. Zara was silent for a moment, then asked, Are you running towards something, Lucas O'Malley, or away from it? The question caught him off guard with its directness. Does it matter? I think it does, she said quietly. To you, at least. Lucas looked out over the sleeping town, considering her words. No one had asked him such a thing in years, perhaps ever. Maybe both, he admitted finally, or neither. I just know I can't stay in one place for long. Because of what happened with your stepfather. Again, her perception startled him. Partly, he acknowledged, and other things. Zara didn't press further, and he was grateful for that. They stood in companionable silence, the only sounds the distant hooting of an owl and the occasional creak of the house settling for the night. I want to thank you, Zara said eventually. Not just for saving Danny, but for giving him something these past 2 days that he's been missing since his father died. What's that? Hope, she said simply. The belief that good men still exist in this world. She touched his arm lightly. You're a better man than you give yourself credit for, Lucas O'Malley. The gentle touch and her words stirred something in Lucas that he'd thought long buried, a yearning for connection, for purpose beyond mere survival. Before he could respond, the front door opened again, and Judith appeared. Zara, dear, it's getting quite chilly out here. You should come inside before you catch cold. Zara's hand fell away from Lucas's arm. Of course, Judith. I was just saying good night to Lucas. Well, don't linger too long, Judith advised, giving Lucas a polite but distant nod before retreating inside. I should go in, Zara said, though she made no immediate move to leave. Yes, Lucas agreed. It's late. She hesitated, then surprised him by reaching up to touch his cheek briefly. Goodbye, Lucas. Safe travels. Before he could respond, she turned and disappeared into the house, leaving him alone with the night and a strange ache in his chest that had nothing to do with physical pain. Lucas slept poorly that night, his dreams filled with quicksand that pulled him down no matter how he struggled, and Zara's voice calling to him from a distance he couldn't bridge. He rose before dawn, packing his few belongings and making his way downstairs in the quiet house. He'd intended to leave without disturbing anyone, but as he reached the front door, a small voice stopped him. "You're going away, aren't you?" Lucas turned to find Danny standing at the bottom of the stairs in his nightshirt, his hair tousled from sleep. "Yes, Danny. It's time for me to move on." The boy's face fell. "But why? Don't you like us anymore?" Lucas knelt down to Danny's level, resting a hand on his shoulder. "It's not that at all. Your ma and you are settled now with your aunt and uncle. You don't need me anymore." "Yes, we do," Danny insisted with a child's simple certainty. "Ma smiles more when you're around, and you teach me things." Lucas felt an unexpected tightness in his throat. "There are plenty of good folks here in Elm Creek who can teach you things, Danny. Better things than an old cowboy knows." Danny shook his head stubbornly. "Not like you. You're brave and strong, and you saved me from the quicksand." "Danny!" Zara's voice came from the top of the stairs. "What are you doing up so early?" She descended quickly, a robe hastily pulled over her nightgown, her hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. The sight of her like this, unguarded, intimate, made Lucas rise to his feet, suddenly aware of the impropriety of the moment. "Lucas is leaving, Ma," Danny reported, his voice wavering slightly. Zara's eyes met Lucas's, and he saw in them a mixture of understanding and something that might have been regret. "Yes, I know, Danny. We talked about this yesterday, remember? Lucas has his own journey to continue. But why can't his journey be with us?" Danny asked, the simple question striking at the heart of what Lucas had been avoiding. "That's not for us to decide," Zara said gently, placing a hand on her son's head. "Now go back upstairs and dress for breakfast. I'll be up in a moment." Danny looked from his mother to Lucas and back again, clearly wanting to protest further but recognizing the finality in her tone. "Goodbye, Lucas," he said solemnly, offering his small hand. Lucas shook it with equal gravity. "Goodbye, Danny. Mind your mother and stay away from quicksand." A ghost of a smile touched the boy's face before he turned and trudged back upstairs. His shoulders slumped in defeat. When they were alone, Zara stepped closer to Lucas. "I'm sorry about that. He's grown attached to you quickly." "Children do," Lucas said, trying to keep his tone light. "He'll forget about me soon enough." Zara shook her head. "No, he won't. Neither will I." The simple statement hung between them, loaded with possibilities that Lucas had never allowed himself to consider. "Zara," he began, not sure what he intended to say. She raised a hand to stop him. "You don't need to explain, Lucas. I understand. This is who you are, a man who doesn't stay, and that's all right." She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We'll be fine here with Judith and Edward." Lucas nodded, swallowing the words that threatened to spill out words about how in just 2 days, she and Danny had wakened something in him he'd thought long dead. How the prospect of riding away from them felt strangely like riding away from a part of himself. "Take care of yourself, Zara Taylor," he said instead, touching the brim of his hat in a final salute. "And you, Lucas O'Malley," she replied softly. He turned and walked out the door, down the steps to where Rusty waited patiently. As he mounted and guided the horse toward the main road out of Elm Creek, Lucas didn't look back. Looking back was a luxury he'd denied himself years ago, when he'd first chosen the path of a drifter over the pain of attachment. The day was breaking clear and fine as Lucas rode west out of Elm Creek, the rising sun at his back illuminating the trail ahead. This was familiar, the solitude, the open country, the freedom to go wherever the wind might take him. This was what he'd chosen time and again, when life had offered other possibilities. Yet as the miles passed beneath Rusty's steady gait, Lucas found himself replaying moments from the past few days, Danny's face lighting up when he'd successfully skipped a stone across the pond. Zara's quiet strength as she'd faced her sister's well-meaning but condescending charity. The feel of her hand on his arm as they'd stood together on the porch beneath the stars. By midday, Lucas had covered considerable distance, stopping at a small creek to water Rusty and rest briefly. As he sat on a fallen log, eating jerky from his provisions, he found himself wondering what Zara and Danny were doing at that moment. Were they settling into life in Judith's grand house? Was Danny exploring the town with the excitement of a boy discovering new territory? Was Zara already looking for the employment she'd insisted she wanted, despite her sister's objections? "None of your concern, O'Malley," he muttered to himself, packing away his meager lunch and preparing to continue his journey. But as he mounted Rusty and turned the horse's head westward once more, an image rose unbidden in his mind, Danny stuck in the quicksand, terrified but trusting as Lucas had worked to free him. The memory was followed by another. Zara's face as she'd gathered her son into her arms, tears of relief mingling with mud on her cheeks. Lucas had saved the boy that day, but in some inexplicable way, that moment had marked the beginning of his own rescue from a different kind of quicksand, the emotional isolation in which he'd been slowly sinking for years. He reined Rusty to a halt, the realization washing over him with unexpected clarity. For the first time in his adult life, Lucas O'Malley was running from something he wanted rather than from painful memories or obligations he couldn't fulfill. Rusty snorted and stamped as if questioning the sudden stop. Lucas patted the horse's neck absently, his mind racing. What was he considering? Turning back? For what purpose? Zara and Danny were settled now, with family who could provide them security and comfort he never could. What did he have to offer a widow and her son except uncertainty and a nomadic existence that was no life for a child? And yet, Lucas remembered the look in Zara's eyes when he'd said goodbye, not just sadness, but a deeper understanding of who he was and what drove him. She had seen him, truly seen him, in a way no one had in years. And Danny, with a child's innocent wisdom, had asked the very question Lucas had been avoiding. Why couldn't his journey be with them? Almost without conscious decision, Lucas turned Rusty around, facing east toward Elm Creek. "What do you think, old friend?" he murmured to the horse. "Should we go back?" Rusty tossed his head and nickered softly, as if in agreement, and Lucas felt a smile, genuine and unguarded, spread across his face for the first time in longer than he could remember. The return journey seemed both shorter and more urgent than the ride out had been. Lucas pushed Rusty to a faster pace, a sense of purpose driving him that he hadn't felt in years. As he approached Elm Creek in the late afternoon, however, doubts began to creep in. What if Zara didn't want him to return? What if she'd been relieved to see him go, to have one less complication in her already difficult life? He slowed Rusty to a walk as they entered the town, uncertainty making him hesitate. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he should continue on after all. Let Zara and Danny build their new life without the intrusion of a drifter who didn't know how to stay. As Lucas was considering turning around again, he spotted a familiar figure on the boardwalk outside Taylor's General Merchandise, Danny, clutching his mother's hand as they exited the store. Without thinking, Lucas urged Rusty forward, closing the distance between them. "Danny, Zara," he called, drawing their attention. Danny's face lit up with a joy so pure it banished all of Lucas's doubts in an instant. "Lucas," the the boy shouted, breaking free from his mother's grasp and running toward him. "You came back." Lucas dismounted quickly, kneeling to catch Danny as the boy launched himself into his arms. "Hey there, partner," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Over Danny's shoulder, Lucas saw Zara standing frozen on the boardwalk, disbelief and something that made his heart race written across her face. "Lucas," she said, his name a question and a hope all at once. He set Danny down gently and straightened, suddenly unsure what to say now that he was actually here. "I got about 15 miles west before I realized I was heading in the wrong direction," he finally managed. Zara stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "And what direction should you have been heading?" "Wherever you and Danny are," Lucas answered simply, the truth of it settling into his bones like a long-awaited homecoming. A smile bloomed on Zara's face, radiant and unguarded. "And what made you realize that?" Lucas glanced down at Danny, who was watching them both with eager anticipation, then back to Zara. "Someone wise once asked me if I was running towards something or away from it. I finally figured out the answer." Before Zara could respond, the door to the general store opened, and a well-dressed man with a neat beard and imperious bearing stepped onto the boardwalk. "Zara, who is this?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already disapproved of the answer. "Edward," Zara said, turning to her brother-in-law, "this is Lucas O'Malley, the man who saved Danny from Quicksand and escorted us safely to Elm Creek." She straightened her shoulders, adding with quiet determination, "and a very dear friend." Edward Taylor looked Lucas up and down, taking in his trail-worn appearance with thinly veiled disdain. "Ah yes, the cowboy Judith mentioned. I understood you had departed this morning, Mr. O'Malley." "I had," Lucas confirmed, meeting the man's gaze steadily. "I came back." "For what purpose, might I ask?" Edward's tone was courteous but cool. Before Lucas could respond, Danny piped up. "He came back for us, Uncle Edward. Didn't you, Lucas?" Lucas looked from Danny's hopeful face to Zara's cautiously expectant one and found he could no longer deny the truth. "Yes," he said firmly. "I did." Edward's eyebrows rose. "Indeed. Well, I'm not sure what your intentions are, Mr. O'Malley, but Zara and Daniel are under my protection now. They have no need of further assistance." Lucas bristled at the dismissive tone, but before he could respond, Zara stepped forward, positioning herself between the two men. "Edward," she said, her voice polite but firm, "I appreciate everything you and Judith have done for us. Truly. But you must understand that I intend to make my own decisions about my life and my son's future." Edward frowned. "Zara, be reasonable. What can this man offer you compared to the security and respectability that Judith and I can provide?" Zara glanced back at Lucas, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Something I've been missing for a long time," she said simply. "Hope." The word, echoing her statement from the previous night, struck Lucas deeply. That she could see in him a drifter, a man with nothing to his name but a horse and the clothes on his back a source of hope, seemed nothing short of miraculous. Edward sputtered, clearly unaccustomed to being contradicted. "This is most irregular. Judith will be extremely distressed." "I insist we discuss this at home, privately." "There's nothing to discuss, Edward," Zara replied calmly. "My mind is made up. Lucas," she turned to him, "will you walk with us? I believe we have much to talk about." Lucas nodded, feeling simultaneously terrified and more alive than he had in years. "Lead the way." As they began walking, Lucas leading Rusty by the reins, Edward called after them, "Zara, think of Daniel. What kind of example are you setting?" Zara paused, turning back to her brother-in-law with dignity. "The best one I know. Edward, that courage and kindness matter more than security when it comes to true happiness." They left Edward standing speechless on the boardwalk and made their way toward the town square, where a small park offered benches beneath mature elm trees. Danny ran ahead, his earlier melancholy completely forgotten in the excitement of Lucas's return. "He's happy," Lucas observed, watching the boy chase a butterfly across the grass. "So am I," Zara said quietly. Lucas turned to her, searching her face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. "Are you sure about this, Zara? Your sister and brother-in-law can give you and Danny things I can't: stability, comfort, respectability." "At what cost?" she asked. "Living under their roof would mean living by their rules, accepting their charity along with their judgment. That's not the life I want for Danny or myself." She touched his arm gently. "But I need to know what you want, Lucas. You came back, but for how long?" The question was fair more than fair, and Lucas knew he owed her the complete truth. "I can't promise I won't ever feel the urge to move on," he admitted. "It's been my way for too long. But I can promise to try, Zara, to stay and build something with you and Danny if you'll have me." Zara's eyes softened. "That's all anyone can ask, Lucas, that we try together." They found a bench in the dappled shade of an elm tree, Danny playing within sight but giving them the semblance of privacy. Lucas took Zara's hand tentatively, still marveling at the turn his life had taken in just a few days. "I don't have much," he began. "No land, no house, not much money saved. But I'm strong and I know horses and cattle. I can find work." "We'll figure it out together," Zara assured him. "I'm not afraid of hard work or starting over. I've done it before." Lucas squeezed her hand gently. "There's something else you should know," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I was in the war on the Union side. I've seen things, done things that wake me at night sometimes. I'm not always easy company." Zara's expression grew solemn. "James had nightmares too after his time in the army. I learned to be there when he needed me and to give him space when he didn't. I can do the same for you." Her understanding, offered so simply and without judgment, touched Lucas deeply. "You're a remarkable woman, Zara Taylor." A blush colored her cheeks. "Hardly remarkable. Just someone who knows what matters." They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, watching Danny as he discovered the joys of the park. Finally, Lucas spoke again, voicing the practical concerns that needed to be addressed. "We should talk about what happens next. I could look for work here in Elm Creek, or we could go elsewhere if you prefer. Fort Kearney, maybe, or even further west." Zara considered this. "Danny and I can't impose on Judith and Edward after today, that's certain, but I don't want to rush into anything either." She looked at him thoughtfully. "What if we started with something temporary? There's a small boarding house on the edge of town. We could stay there while we decide where to put down roots." The idea of roots was still foreign to Lucas, but he found himself nodding in agreement. "That sounds sensible." He hesitated, then added, "I want to do this properly, Zara, for Danny's sake and for yours." She tilted her head, a question in her eyes. "What do you mean by properly?" Lucas took a deep breath. "I mean that if we're going to be a family, and that's what I want, what I came back for, then I should court you as you deserve, not rush things." A slow smile spread across Zara's face. "Lucas O'Malley, are you asking permission to court me?" "I suppose I am," he admitted, feeling uncharacteristically uncertain. "Though I'm not sure I remember how it's done." Zara laughed, the sound like music to his ears. "Neither do I. It's been a very long time since anyone courted me." Her expression sobered slightly. "But yes, I would like that very much, for us to take our time to get to know each other better." "Ma, Lucas, look what I found." Danny's excited call interrupted them as the boy ran up, clutching something in his cupped hands. "What is it, son?" Zara asked, leaning forward. Danny carefully opened his hands to reveal a tiny frog, no bigger than a thumbnail, sitting calmly on his palm. "Can we keep him? Please?" Lucas exchanged an amused glance with Zara. "I think Mr. Frog would be happier by the pond where he has friends and family," he suggested gently. Danny considered this, then nodded with surprising maturity. "You're right. It's not nice to take someone away from their home." He looked up at Lucas with sudden intensity. "Are you going to stay with us now? Is this going to be your home too?" Lucas felt Zara tense beside him, clearly concerned about how he would answer such a direct question. He met Danny's gaze steadily, knowing the boy deserved honesty. "I'd like it to be, Danny, if that's all right with you and your ma." Danny's face broke into a wide grin. "It's all right with me." "Is it all right with you, Ma?" Zara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she smiled at her son. "Yes, Danny, it's very all right with me." "Then it's settled," Danny declared with a child's certainty before carefully returning his attention to the tiny frog. "I'm going to put him back by the pond. Will you come with me, Lucas?" "Of course," Lucas agreed, standing and offering Zara his hand to help her up from the bench. The three of them walked together to the small pond at the edge of the park, where Danny solemnly released his discovery back into the water with a serious farewell. As they stood watching the ripples spread across the pond's surface, Lucas felt Danny's small hand slip into his own, and Zara's arm gently linked through his on the other side. For a moment, the sensation was almost overwhelming, this physical connection, this trust, this belonging. "What happens now?" Danny asked, looking up at the adults expectantly. Lucas and Zara exchanged a glance, both seeing in the other's eyes the same mix of uncertainty and hope. "Now," Lucas said, "we find a place to stay tonight, and tomorrow we start figuring out our future." "Together," Zara added softly. "Together," Lucas echoed, the word no longer frightening but full of promise. The small boarding house on Elm Street was run by a widow named Mrs. Abernathy, whose sharp eyes took in the unusual trio standing on her porch with shrewd assessment but no obvious judgment. When Lucas explained, they needed 2 rooms, one for Zara and Danny, and one for himself, the old woman's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded in approval. "I run a respectable establishment," she informed them as she led them upstairs. "No drinking, no carousing, and gentlemen callers only in the parlor until 8 in the evening." "That suits us fine, Mrs. Abernathy," Zara assured her. The rooms were small but clean, with simple furnishings that represented a step down from Judith and Edward's elegant home, but a significant improvement over the trail accommodations they'd recently shared. Danny immediately claimed the window seat in the room he would share with his mother, pressing his nose against the glass to watch the street below. "Will this do?" Lucas asked Zara quietly as Mrs. Abernathy descended the stairs, leaving them in the hallway between their rooms. "It's perfect," she assured him. "Truly." Lucas nodded, relieved. "I should see to Rusty, get him stabled properly, and then I'll start looking for work." "Today?" Zara asked, surprised. "Lucas, you've been riding since dawn. Surely it can wait until tomorrow." He smiled at her concern. "Just inquiries. I want to know what possibilities are out there." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, Danny and I will get settled and perhaps look into the school situation. He should start lessons soon." "I'll meet you back here for supper," Lucas suggested. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned she serves a meal at 6. "We'll be waiting," Zara promised. As Lucas turned to go, Danny called from the window, "Can I come with you to see Rusty, please?" Lucas glanced at Zara, who nodded her permission. "Sure, partner, Rusty would like that." Danny bounded across the room, his earlier energy undiminished despite the eventful day. As they descended the stairs together, Lucas felt the boy's hand slip into his again, the the small fingers trusting and warm against his calloused palm. The sensation was still unfamiliar, but increasingly welcome, a tangible reminder of the connection he was forming with this child who had, against all odds, begun to consider him a part of his life. The livery stable at the edge of town was well maintained, the stalls clean and the hay fresh. The proprietor, a burly man named Peterson, agreed to board Rusty for a reasonable fee and didn't seem surprised when Lucas inquired about work opportunities in the area. "Always need good hands during roundup," Peterson offered. "Few of the larger spreads north of town might be hiring. Or there's the stage line, they're looking for a man who knows horses to help with their remount station." Lucas nodded, filing away the information. "Any of them offer housing for a family?" Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly at the word family, his gaze shifting briefly to Danny, who was stroking Rusty's nose with gentle wonder. "Marshall's place might. He's got some cabins for married hands. Good outfit, fair man." "I appreciate the information," Lucas said. As they left the livery, Danny looked up at Lucas with curious eyes. "Are we going to live on a ranch?" Lucas smiled down at him. "Maybe. Would you like that?" Danny nodded enthusiastically. "Pa used to tell me stories about cowboys and ranch life. He said someday we might have our own cattle." A pang of something not quite jealousy, but awareness of the space James Taylor still occupied in his son's heart passed through Lucas. "Your pa sounds like he had good dreams." "He did," Danny agreed solemnly. "Ma says dreams don't die with people. They just wait for someone else to pick them up." The simple wisdom of the statement, clearly a direct quote from Zara, struck Lucas deeply. Was that what he was doing now, picking up the dreams of a man he'd never met, a man who had loved Zara and Danny first? "Your ma is a smart woman," Lucas said finally. "The smartest," Danny agreed readily. "Except when she makes me eat beans. I hate beans." Lucas laughed, the tension broken. "Well, I can't help you there, partner. Beans are a cowboy's best friend on the trail." They continued their walk through town, Danny's natural curiosity leading to questions about everything. They passed the telegraph office, the gunsmith shop, the newly constructed brick building that housed the town bank. Lucas answered as best he could, finding unexpected pleasure in the boy's eager mind and open acceptance of him. As they approached a small confectionery, Danny's pace slowed noticeably, his eyes fixed on the display of candies in the window. "Would your ma approve of a small treat?" Lucas asked, already knowing the answer from the hopeful look that bloomed on Danny's face. "She might," the boy hedged, clearly torn between honesty and desire. "If it was very small." Lucas chuckled. "Let's risk it." Inside, the sweet aroma of sugar and chocolate enveloped them. Lucas purchased a small paper bag of peppermint sticks, allowing Danny to select the ones he wanted. As an afterthought, he added a piece of chocolate wrapped in silver paper. "For your ma," he explained when Danny looked at him questioningly. "Ladies like chocolate." Danny accepted this wisdom with a nod. "Pa used to bring ma flowers sometimes. Yellow ones were her favorite." Again, the casual mention of James Taylor reminded Lucas that he was stepping into a life already rich with history and memories. But instead of feeling like an intruder, he found himself grateful that Danny had known a father's love, however briefly. "We'll remember that," Lucas promised. "Yellow flowers." By the time they returned to the boarding house, it was nearly 6 o'clock. Zara was waiting in the small parlor, her hair freshly arranged and wearing a clean dress that Lucas recognized as one she'd packed in her trunk, simpler than the one she'd worn at Judith's house, but becoming in its modest way. "There you are," she said with a smile. "I was beginning to worry you'd gotten lost." "Lucas was showing me the town," Danny explained, carefully keeping the paper bag of candy hidden behind his back. And Rusty has a nice new place to stay with lots of hay." "That's wonderful," Zara said, her eyes moving to Lucas's face with a question in them. "Did you learn anything about work possibilities?" Lucas nodded. "A few leads to follow up on tomorrow. The stage line needs someone who knows horses, and there's ranch work available too." "Some with housing," Danny added importantly. Zara's eyebrows rose. "Housing? You're thinking that far ahead already," Lucas shrugged, suddenly uncertain. "Just exploring options. We don't have to decide anything right away." A warm smile spread across Zara's face. "No, I'm glad you're thinking about it. I just didn't expect." She trailed off, her cheeks coloring slightly. "Didn't expect what?" Lucas asked. "Didn't expect you to be considering something so permanent," she finished quietly. The word hung between them, loaded with meaning. Lucas had never considered himself a permanent fixture in anyone's life, had avoided attachments precisely because they anchored a man in place. Yet here he was, discussing housing options and future plans as if they were the most natural things in the world. "I told you I came back to stay," he said simply. "I meant it." The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Abernathy's announcement that supper was served. As they moved toward the dining room where several other boarders were already seated, Danny finally revealed his hidden treasure. "We got something for you, Ma," he said, producing the piece of chocolate from the paper bag. Lucas said ladies like chocolate. Zara accepted the small gift with exaggerated delight, her eyes meeting Lucas's over her son's head with a warmth that made his heart beat faster. "He's absolutely right. Thank you both." Dinner was a simple affair of roast chicken, potatoes, and greens, but after days of trail food it seemed a feast. The other boarders, a young clerk from the bank, an elderly widow, and a traveling salesman, made polite conversation, clearly curious about the new arrivals but too well-mannered to pry openly. After the meal, they retired to the parlor where Danny proudly showed his mother the peppermint sticks Lucas had purchased, carefully rationing himself to one with her permission. As the evening progressed, the boy's eyelids grew heavy despite his attempts to stay awake. "Time for bed, young man," Zara declared when Danny's head nodded for the third time in as many minutes. "Say good night to Lucas." Danny roused himself enough to stand and offer his hand solemnly to Lucas, mimicking the adult gesture he'd seen earlier. "Good night, Lucas. Will you be here tomorrow?" "I will," Lucas promised, shaking the small hand with equal gravity. "Sleep well, partner." As Zara led a sleepy Danny upstairs, Mrs. Abernathy appeared with a pot of coffee and 2 cups. "Thought you might want this," she said to Lucas. "Your wife will be back down, I expect." Lucas started to correct her but stopped himself. Let the old woman think what she wanted for now. Explanations could come later. When Zara returned a few minutes later, she found Lucas sitting by the parlor window, coffee waiting. "He fell asleep the moment his head hit the pillow," she reported, settling into the chair opposite him. "It's been quite a day for all of us." Lucas nodded, handing her a cup of coffee. "Mrs. Abernathy seems to have assumed we're married," he said quietly, not wanting the other boarders to overhear. Zara's eyebrows rose, but she didn't seem overly concerned. "People will assume what they want. We know the truth." "And what is the truth, Zara?" Lucas asked, the question that had been building in him all day finally finding voice. "What are we to each other?" She considered this, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup thoughtfully. "Friends, certainly. Perhaps more, given time." She met his gaze directly. "I care for you, Lucas. More than I would have thought possible in such a short time. But I also have Danny to consider. He's already lost one father. I can't let him become attached to another man who might disappear." The honesty was both refreshing and sobering. Lucas nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in her caution. "I understand. And I meant what I said about doing this properly. I'm not asking for promises, Zara. Just a chance to prove I can be the man you and Danny need." A soft smile touched her lips. "You already are that man, Lucas. You just need to convince yourself of it." The words settled around him like a blessing, offering both challenge and absolution. They talked for another hour, making plans for the next day. Lucas would investigate the job possibilities further while Zara inquired about enrolling Danny in the local school. They would meet for lunch at the small cafe across from the general store, then decide their next steps together. As the clock struck 9, Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway with a pointed look at the timepiece. "Parlor closes at 9, folks. House rules." Lucas stood, offering Zara his hand. "I'll walk you upstairs." At her door they paused, suddenly awkward in the narrow hallway. "Thank you," Zara said softly, "for coming back. I don't think I said that properly before." "Thank you for giving me a reason to," Lucas replied. Impulsively, Zara rose on tiptoe and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Lucas." "Good night, Zara," he murmured, watching as she slipped inside her room and closed the door quietly behind her. In his own small room, Lucas sat on the edge of the bed, touching his cheek where her lips had been. How strange life was, how unpredictable its turns. A week ago, he had been a solitary drifter with no fixed destination and no companions but his horse and the ghosts of his past. Now, he was considering ranch jobs with family housing, buying candy for a boy who looked at him with trust and admiration, and feeling his heart race at a simple kiss on the cheek from a woman who had seen through his carefully constructed walls. For the first time in years, Lucas O'Malley fell asleep not dreading the dawn but eagerly anticipating it. The next week passed in a blur of activity as they established themselves in Elm Creek. Lucas secured a position at the Marshall Ranch, a substantial cattle operation north of town that did indeed offer a small cabin for married hands. The question of their exact relationship was delicately navigated, Lucas introducing Zara as his intended, a statement that wasn't entirely untrue given his hopes, and one that Zara didn't contradict when they visited the property together. "It's not much," Lucas said apologetically as they stood inside the two-room cabin that had been offered as part of his compensation. "But it's weather-tight, and there's room for a garden out back." Zara walked the small space, her expression thoughtful as she examined the stone fireplace, the plank floors, the windows that caught the afternoon light. "It's a good start," she declared finally. "Better than the house James and I began with." Danny, who had been exploring the loft space accessible by a ladder, called down excitedly, "Ma, there's room for my own bed up here. Can I sleep in the loft?" Zara laughed, exchanging an amused glance with Lucas. "We'll see, Danny. Nothing's decided yet." But Lucas could tell from her expression that she was already envisioning how the space could be transformed into a home where furniture might be placed, what curtains would suit the windows, how a vegetable garden might be laid out come spring. "When would you need to start work?" she asked Lucas as they walked back toward the main house where Mr. Marshall awaited their decision. "Monday," Lucas replied. "They're gathering cattle from the north pastures for the winter drive to market. Good timing. Actually, they're short-handed." Zara nodded thoughtfully. "That gives us 3 days to get settled if we decide this is what we want." "Is it?" Lucas asked, stopping to face her directly. "What you want, I mean." She looked toward the cabin, then back at him, her expression serious. "It could be. But Lucas, we need to be honest about something." His heart sank, anticipating her concerns. "What's that?" "If we take this position, if we move into that cabin together, people will assume we're married. It's the only proper arrangement." Lucas nodded slowly. "I understand that. Do you?" Zara pressed. Because while I'm willing to let people assume what they will for now, I need to know your intentions, not just for my sake, but for Danny's. Lucas had been expecting this conversation, had been preparing for it in his mind. Still, actually speaking the words aloud was more daunting than he'd anticipated. My intentions are honorable, Zara. I want to build a life with you and Danny if you'll have me. I know it's too soon, maybe, but I'm not going anywhere, and when you're ready, I'd be proud to make it official. The proposal, if it could be called that, hung between them in the clear autumn air. Zara studied his face for a long moment, as if searching for any sign of hesitation or insincerity. Finally, she nodded, a small smile touching her lips. Then we'll take the cabin and the job. And we'll see where this journey leads us. Relief and joy flooded through Lucas. He took her hands in his, resisting the urge to pull her into his arms with Danny watching curiously from a short distance away. You won't regret it, he promised. Zara's smile widened. I know I won't. The next 3 days were a flurry of preparations. Lucas negotiated with Mrs. Abernathy to release them from their weekly boarding arrangement, while Zara made a carefully worded peace with Judith, explaining their decision without going into details that might provoke her sister's disapproval. To Lucas's surprise, Edward offered the use of his delivery wagon to transport their few belongings to the ranch, a gesture of reconciliation that Zara accepted gratefully. Danny was enrolled in the town school, with arrangements made for him to ride to and from the ranch with Mr. Marshall's older children who attended the same school. The boy was thrilled at the prospect of having cousins nearby, as he called the Marshall children, and especially excited about the small pony Lucas promised to help him learn to ride once they were settled. By Sunday evening, they were established in the cabin. Their possessions were Zara's trunk of clothing and household linens, Danny's small collection of toys and books, and Lucas's personal effects that had traveled with him for years in his saddlebags. The cabin's previous occupants had left behind basic furniture, a table and chairs, a bed frame in the main room, and a chest of drawers that Zara immediately put to use organizing their clothes. It needs a woman's touch, she declared, surveying the space critically, but it has possibilities. Lucas watched her move around the cabin, already claiming it as her domain, and felt a contentment he hadn't experienced since childhood. This was what he had been missing all these years without realizing it, not just a roof over his head, but a place where he belonged, with people who wanted him there. That night, after Danny had been tucked into the small bed they'd set up in the loft and had fallen asleep to the sound of Lucas reading from one of his books, the adults sat before the fire Lucas had built to ward off the autumn chill. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Zara asked, her hands busy with mending one of Danny's shirts that had suffered during their journey. Lucas considered the question. About the work? No. I've been handling cattle since I was barely older than Danny. Not about the work, Zara clarified. About us playing house together. The phrasing made him smile. Is that what we're doing? Playing house? She set down her mending, her expression turning serious. I don't know what we're doing, Lucas. I just know it feels right, even though by any conventional standard it's too soon and too uncertain. Lucas moved from his chair to sit beside her on the small sofa, taking her hands in his. What's between us may have happened quickly, Zara, but that doesn't make it less real, at least not for me. Nor for me, she admitted softly. But Lucas, there's something I need to make clear. He tensed slightly, preparing himself for whatever condition or concern she might raise. Go on. I'm a widow, not a naive girl. I know what it means for a man and woman to live together as we're about to do. But until things are official between us, until we're properly married, I need to maintain certain boundaries. Lucas felt a flush of warmth at her directness, followed by immediate respect for her principles. "I understand completely," he assured her. "I'll sleep on a bedroll by the fire until we're both ready for more," she finished for him, a blush coloring her cheeks in the firelight. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I'm a patient man, Zara Taylor." A smile touched her lips. "We'll see about that, Lucas O'Malley." Monday morning brought the true beginning of their new life together. Lucas rose before dawn to start the fire and prepare coffee, allowing Zara a few extra minutes of sleep before the day began. Danny, excited about his first day at the new school, was awake and dressed almost before his mother called up to the loft. As they sat around the small table eating the breakfast Zara had prepared biscuits and gravy, a luxury after trail rations, Lucas was struck by how natural it felt. This domestic scene he'd never imagined for himself. Danny chattered about the school day ahead. Zara reminded him to mind his manners and remember his lunch pail, and Lucas found himself offering advice about making friends in a new place. "Just be yourself," he told the boy. "The right friends will appreciate you for who you are." Danny nodded solemnly, accepting this wisdom from a man who had spent most of his adult life avoiding lasting connections with others, an irony not lost on Lucas. After breakfast, Lucas saddled Rusty and prepared to ride to the main ranch house, where he would meet the foreman and begin his first day's work. Zara and Danny would ride into town with the Marshall children and their mother, Zara to inquire about possible sewing work to supplement their income, and Danny to start school. "We'll be fine," Zara assured him, straightening his collar in a gesture that felt wonderfully domestic. "Don't worry about us. I always will," Lucas replied honestly, "but I know you can handle yourselves." He knelt to address Danny directly. "Mind your mother and your teacher and remember what I said about making friends." "I will," Danny promised. "And will you teach me more about horses when you get home tonight?" Home. The word resonated in Lucas's chest like the clear tone of a bell. "Count on it, partner." As Lucas rode toward the main house, he found himself reflecting on how thoroughly his life had changed in the span of a week. From a man with no fixed address and no attachments to one with a job, a home however modest, and a family depending on him. The responsibility should have felt overwhelming, perhaps even suffocating to someone who had valued his freedom as he had. Instead, it felt like stepping into a role he had been meant to play all along. The work itself was familiar, hard, but satisfying. The Marshall Ranch was well run, the cattle healthy, and the other hands competent and relatively friendly. Lucas kept to himself for the most part, focusing on proving his worth through his work rather than conversation. But by day's end, he had earned the respect of the foreman and established himself as someone who knew cattle and horses. When Lucas returned to the cabin that evening, dusty and tired but satisfied with his day's labor, he found Zara and Danny waiting for him. The cabin was transformed, curtains hung at the windows, a cloth covered the table, and the scent of fresh bread filled the air. Danny ran to greet him, full of stories about his first day at school and the friends he'd already made. "And Ma got work at the dressmaker's in town," Danny announced proudly. "Mrs. Foster said Ma has the neatest stitches she's ever seen." Zara smiled, accepting Lucas's admiring glance with a modest shrug. "It's just 3 days a week while Danny's in school. The pay isn't much, but it will help." "That's wonderful," Lucas said, truly pleased for her. Independence was clearly important to Zara, and he respected that need to contribute, to build something of her own alongside what they were creating together. As they sat down to the simple but hearty meal Zara had prepared, Lucas was struck again by how right this felt, this sharing of the day's events, this breaking of bread together, this sense of belonging that had eluded him for so long. Later, after Danny was asleep in his loft bed, Lucas and Zara sat together on the small porch, watching as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. "Happy?" Lucas asked quietly, his hand finding hers in the gathering darkness. "Yes," Zara replied without hesitation. "Are you? Is this enough for you?" The question held her deeper concern whether the settled life they were building could satisfy a man who had roamed freely for so long. Lucas considered his answer carefully, wanting to be honest with her and with himself. "I won't pretend I don't sometimes hear the call of the open trail," he admitted. "It's been my way of life for too many years to forget it entirely. But Zara, what I've found here with you and Danny is worth more than all the freedom in the world." She leaned against him then, her head resting on his shoulder in a gesture of trust that moved him deeply. "Then we'll make sure you don't forget that," she murmured, "on the days when the horizon calls to you." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her soap and flower and something uniquely Zara. "I'm counting on it." The weeks passed, autumn deepening toward winter as they settled into their new life together. Lucas found satisfaction in his work at the ranch, earning the respect of his employers and fellow hands through his skill and reliability. Zara's position at the dressmaker's shop expanded as her talent became evident, bringing in steady income that she managed carefully, setting aside a portion each week toward what she called their future. Danny thrived at school and at home, forming friendships with the Marshall children and other youngsters, and developing a special bond with Lucas, who patiently taught him about horses, cattle, and the ways of the land. The boy's nightmares, which had troubled him since his father's death, grew less frequent as security and stability returned to his life. Each evening when Lucas returned from work, he would find Zara and Danny waiting, the small cabin transformed more and more into a true home with each passing day. Sometimes there would be fresh curtains Zara had sewn, or a new pillow for the sofa, or wildflowers Danny had gathered arranged in a jar on the table. Small touches that spoke of permanence, of putting down roots. Lucas kept his promise to sleep on a bedroll by the fire, respecting Zara's boundaries despite the growing attraction between them. Their evenings often ended with conversation on the porch or before the hearth, discussing their days, making plans, learning each other's histories and hopes. Sometimes these talks ended with a good-night kiss that grew increasingly difficult to keep brief. But Lucas never pressed for more, understanding that trust was being built between them with each passing day. As November turned to December, preparations for Christmas began in earnest. Danny was beside himself with excitement, especially when Lucas helped him select and cut a small pine tree to set up in the corner of the cabin. Zara sewed simple ornaments from scraps of fabric, and Danny made paper chains at school to decorate the branches. "It's not much compared to what Judith will have," Zara remarked as they stood admiring their handiwork one evening, "but I think it's perfect." "Better than perfect," Lucas agreed, his arm slipping naturally around her waist. "It's ours." The morning of Christmas Eve brought a letter from Judith, the first communication since their abrupt departure from her home months earlier. Zara read it silently, her expression unreadable, then handed it to Lucas. The letter was formal but not unkind, expressing hope that they were well and extending an invitation to Christmas dinner the following day. "Edward and I would be pleased to welcome you, Daniel and Mr. O'Malley, should you wish to join us," Judith had written. "The holidays are a time for family after all. What do you think?" Zara asked as Lucas finished reading. "Should we accept?" Lucas considered the question carefully. His instinct was to decline. His memories of the Taylor home were not particularly fond, and he was looking forward to a quiet Christmas in their own cabin. But he also recognized the olive branch being extended and the importance of family connections, especially for Danny. "It's your decision," he said finally, "but I think Danny might enjoy seeing his aunt and uncle again, and it would be good for you to mend fences with your sister." Zara nodded, relief in her expression. "I think so too. I just wasn't sure you'd be comfortable there." Lucas smiled wryly. "I've faced down angry steers and blizzards, Zara. I think I can manage Christmas dinner with your sister." She laughed, the tension broken. "You say that now. Wait until you see Judith in full hostess mode." They penned a reply accepting the invitation, and Lucas rode into town to deliver it personally, taking the opportunity to collect the special gifts he'd ordered for Zara and Danny, a silver locket for her with space for a small photograph inside, and a hand-tooled leather journal for Danny, who had recently shown an interest in writing down his observations about life on the ranch. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with a dusting of snow that transformed the landscape into something from a fairy tale. Danny was awake at first light, his excitement too great to contain as he called down from the loft for Zara and Lucas to wake up. They exchanged gifts simply, but with genuine joy, Lucas receiving a warm knitted scarf from Zara and a hand-drawn picture of Rusty from Danny. Danny exclaiming over the journal from Lucas and a new shirt and jacket Zara had sewn in secret. And Zara tearfully accepting the locket from Lucas and a small carved wooden heart Danny had made with help from one of the ranch hands. "It's to keep in your locket," Danny explained seriously, "since we don't have a photograph yet." "It's perfect," Zara assured him, immediately placing the tiny carving in the locket and fastening it around her neck. "I'll treasure it always." After breakfast, they dressed in their finest clothes for the visit to Judith and Edward's home. Lucas wore the one good shirt he owned, freshly washed and ironed by Zara, and Danny proudly donned his new jacket, standing straighter as if the garment itself conferred maturity. The Marshall family had lent them use of a small wagon for the day, and Lucas drove them carefully into town, the crisp winter air bringing color to their cheeks and a festive feeling to the journey. Elm Creek was quiet, most businesses closed for the holiday, but smoke rose from every chimney and occasional laughter could be heard from homes they passed. As they approached the Taylor residence, Lucas felt Zara tense beside him. "It will be fine," he assured her, covering her gloved hand with his own. "Remember, we're not asking for anything from them. We're visiting as equals." She nodded, squeezing his hand gratefully. "You're right. It's just, Judith has a way of making me feel like that uncertain younger sister again." "Well, you're not," Lucas said firmly. "You're a strong, independent woman who's building a good life on her own terms. Don't let her forget it." The door was opened by the same maid who had attended them months earlier, and they were ushered into the parlor where Judith and Edward awaited them. The greetings were cordial if somewhat stiff at first, but Danny's natural enthusiasm for the elegantly decorated tree and the pile of presents beneath it soon broke the ice. "We have gifts for you too," he announced proudly, presenting the carefully wrapped packages. They had brought handkerchiefs Zara had embroidered for Edward, a lace collar she had made for Judith, and drawings Danny had done of the Elm Creek Church and town square. "These are lovely," Judith said, genuine appreciation in her voice as she examined her sister's fine needlework. "You've always had a gift, Zara." "Thank you," Zara replied, accepting the compliment with quiet dignity. "The dressmaker seems to think so too." "I've been helping with her more complicated orders." "Indeed," Edward raised his eyebrows. "I had understood you were merely doing basic mending and alterations." "Zara's work goes well beyond that," Lucas said, unable to keep a note of pride from his voice. "Mrs. Foster has even suggested she might take on apprentices of her own someday. Judith and Edward exchanged a glance that Lucas couldn't quite interpret, but when Judith spoke again, her tone was warmer. "Well, that's splendid news. And what of your position at the Marshall Ranch, Mr. O'Malley? Is it proving satisfactory?" "More than satisfactory," Lucas confirmed. "Mr. Marshall has mentioned the possibility of making me head wrangler come spring." Another exchange of glances between the Taylors, this one clearly communicating surprise and reassessment. The conversation flowed more easily after that, particularly when other guests began to arrive, friends and business associates of Edward's, along with their wives and children. Danny quickly found companions among the other youngsters, while Lucas and Zara mingled with the adults, sharing stories of their life at the ranch and listening to local news and gossip. During dinner, an elaborate affair with more courses than Lucas had ever seen at one meal, Edward surprised them by raising his glass in a toast. "To family," he said, his gaze moving from Judith to Zara and finally including Lucas in a nod that felt like acknowledgement, if not quite acceptance. "May the new year bring us all continued prosperity and happiness." "To family," the guests echoed, glasses raised. Lucas met Zara's eyes across the table, sharing a private smile at this unexpected gesture of reconciliation. Whatever Edward's motives, genuine familial feeling, or simply a desire to maintain appearances before his guests, the moment represented a thawing in relations that Lucas knew meant a great deal to Zara. As they prepared to depart late in the afternoon, laden with gifts from Judith and Edward that were far more expensive than anything they had been able to give in return, Judith drew Zara aside for a private word. Lucas watched from a distance as the sisters spoke, noting how Zara's posture gradually relaxed from its initial defensiveness to something more open. When they rejoined the men in the entryway, both sisters had slightly reddened eyes, but their expressions were peaceful. "You must visit again soon," Judith said, embracing Zara with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "All of you," she added, including Lucas and Danny in her gaze. "We'd like that," Zara replied sincerely. Outside, as Lucas helped Zara and Danny into the wagon, he raised a questioning eyebrow at Zara. "Everything all right?" she nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. Judith apologized in her way for how things ended when we left, and she asked. Zara hesitated, glancing at Danny, who was already engrossed in examining his new gifts. She asked when we might make our arrangement official. Lucas felt his pulse quicken. "What did you tell her?" "That we would know when the time was right," Zara replied softly. "And that some things can't be rushed." Lucas nodded, understanding and respecting her answer. "Your sister is a wise woman beneath all that propriety." Zara laughed. "Don't let her hear you say that. She'll be insufferable." The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, Danny eventually falling asleep against Zara's shoulder, exhausted from the excitement of the day. As they drove through the gathering dusk, snow began to fall again, gentle flakes that drifted down in the stillness of the winter evening. "It's been a good day," Lucas said quietly, not wanting to wake Danny. "The best Christmas I can remember in years," Zara agreed. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the soft breathing of their sleeping charge. "I've been thinking," Lucas said finally, his voice low, "about what your sister asked." Zara turned to look at him, her face half hidden in the fading light. "Oh, about making things official," he clarified. "I know we agreed to take our time to be sure, and I respect that, Zara. But I also want you to know that I've never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of you and Danny, of the family we're becoming." In the dim light, he saw her eyes shine with unshed tears. "Lucas, I'm not asking for an answer now, he continued, just for you to think about it. About whether you might be ready sometime soon to make this temporary arrangement into something permanent. Zara's gloved hand found his on the reins, squeezing gently. I've been thinking about it too, she admitted. More than thinking about it, wishing for it. Lucas's heart leaped at her words, but he kept his voice steady. Then maybe it's time we stopped wishing and started planning. When the spring comes, perhaps. Why wait for spring? Zara asked softly. Lucas looked at her sharply, sure he had misheard. What? Why wait for spring? She repeated, more firmly now. We've been living as a family for months, Lucas. Danny already thinks of you as his father in all but name, and I. She hesitated, then finished with quiet certainty. I love you. I have for longer than I've been willing to admit, even to myself. The words he had been longing to hear, spoken so simply in the quiet of the winter evening, struck Lucas with a force that left him momentarily speechless. When he finally found his voice, it was rough with emotion. I love you too, Zara. God help me. I think I have since I pulled Danny from that quicksand and saw the look in your eyes like I was some kind of hero when all my life I've been running from being anyone's anything. She smiled, the tears now spilling freely down her cheeks. You are a hero, Lucas O'Malley. Not because you saved my son, though I'll be grateful for that until my dying day, but because you had the courage to stop running, to come back, to stay. Lucas reined the wagon to a halt, turning to face her fully. Zara Taylor, will you marry me? Not someday, not in the spring, but as soon as it can be arranged. Yes, she whispered, her voice sure despite its softness. Yes, I will. They sealed the promise with a kiss, gentle out of consideration for the sleeping boy between them, but filled with the certainty of their shared future. When they parted, both were smiling despite the tears that glistened in the moonlight now breaking through the clouds. Should we wake Danny to tell him? Lucas asked as they resumed their journey. Zara shook her head. Let him sleep. We'll tell him in the morning. It will be his second Christmas gift. The new year began with a wedding, simple but joyful, held in the small church in Elm Creek, with Danny standing proudly as Lucas's best man and Judith serving as Zara's matron of honor. The Marshall family attended, as did Edward and several of Lucas's fellow ranch hands. Mrs. Foster closed the dressmaker's shop for the day to be present, and even Mrs. Abernathy made an appearance, nodding in satisfaction as if the event confirmed her initial assessment of their relationship. Zara wore a dress of deep blue that she had made herself, with lace collar and cuffs that set off her auburn hair and fair complexion beautifully. Lucas, in a new shirt and vest purchased for the occasion, felt both terrified and more certain than he had ever been as he spoke his vows in a clear, steady voice that belied the pounding of his heart. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Lucas kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic observers. As they turned to face their small gathering of friends and family, Danny rushed forward to embrace them both, his joy uncontainable. We're really a family now, he declared, looking up at them with shining eyes. Forever and always. Forever and always, Lucas agreed, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. The small reception was held at Judith and Edward's home, a gesture of reconciliation that Zara had accepted with grateful tears when it was offered. The elegant house was filled with laughter and conversation, as guests celebrated the union of two people, whose unlikely meeting had blossomed into a love that everyone present could see was genuine and deep. As Lucas stood watching Zara move among their guests, accepting congratulations and sharing smiles, he was struck again by how thoroughly his life had changed in the few months since he had first ridden through Fort Kearney. intent on nothing more than restocking his supplies before continuing his solitary journey west. "She's a remarkable woman, your wife," Edward Taylor said, coming to stand beside Lucas with 2 glasses of whiskey, one of which he offered to the new groom. "The most remarkable I've ever known," Lucas agreed, accepting the drink with a nod of thanks. Edward regarded him thoughtfully over the rim of his glass. "When you first appeared on our doorstep, O'Malley, I thought you were simply another drifter who would break my sister-in-law's heart and disappear when responsibility called." Lucas met the man's gaze steadily. "A fair assessment at the time, perhaps," Edward acknowledged with a slight smile, "but it seems I underestimated you." "Many have made that mistake," Lucas replied without rancor, "including myself." Edward raised his glass in a silent toast that Lucas returned before both men sipped their whiskey. "Will you remain at the Marshall Ranch?" Edward asked after a moment. Lucas nodded. "For now. The work suits me and the cabin is becoming a real home for us. But someday—" He hesitated, uncertain whether to share the dream he and Zara had discussed in quiet conversations before the fire. "Someday," Edward prompted. "Someday we'd like a place of our own," Lucas admitted. "Not a large spread, just enough to run some cattle and horses, to build something we can pass on to Danny and—" He stopped, realizing he had nearly revealed a hope that was still too new, too tender to speak aloud. But Edward, shrewd businessman that he was, caught the unfinished thought. "And any other children that might come along," Lucas smiled, unable to hide his pleasure at the prospect. "God willing." Edward nodded thoughtfully, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Land prices are reasonable west of here. The railroad has made shipping cattle more profitable than it once was. A man with experience and determination could do well. A man would also need capital," Lucas pointed out practically. "Indeed." Edward finished his whiskey and set the glass aside. "Well, when you're ready to discuss that aspect further, my door is open. Family should help family after all." Before Lucas could respond to this unexpected offer, Danny appeared at his elbow, tugging at his sleeve. "Lucas, I mean, Pa," he corrected himself with a grin, still testing out the new title they had agreed he could use after the wedding. "Ma says it's time to cut the cake." "We can't keep your mother waiting then," Lucas said, excusing himself from Edward with a nod of thanks for both the drink and the conversation. The cake, a simple but elegant creation made by Judith's cook under Zara's direction, was cut with appropriate ceremony. Bride and groom feeding each other, the first bites to the appreciative applause of their guests. As Lucas wiped a smudge of frosting from Zara's lip with gentle fingers, he was struck again by the miracle of her, this strong, beautiful woman who had somehow seen in him not the drifter he had been but the man he could become. "Happy?" he murmured, echoing the question he had asked her that first evening on their cabin porch. "Completely," she replied, her eyes shining with a joy that needed no further elaboration. Later, as the reception wound down and guests began to depart, Judith approached them with an unexpected announcement. "Edward and I would like Daniel to stay with us tonight," she said, glancing meaningfully from Zara to Lucas, "to give you two some privacy on your wedding night." Zara colored slightly but nodded in acceptance of the thoughtful offer. "If Danny agrees, that would be very kind." Danny, thrilled at the prospect of spending the night in his aunt and uncle's grand house and playing with the new toys they had given him as wedding gifts, readily consented. As they prepared to leave, he hugged both Lucas and Zara fiercely. "I love you, Ma," he said to Zara before turning to Lucas. "And I love you, Pa." The words, spoken with such natural affection, filled Lucas with a warmth that no amount of whiskey could match. "I love you too, son," he replied, the term feeling right on his lips for the first time. The ride back to their cabin was different from any they had shared before, charged with anticipation and a new awareness of each other as husband and wife rather than two people carefully maintaining appropriate boundaries. When they arrived, Lucas lifted Zara from the wagon and carried her across the threshold in accordance with tradition, both of them laughing at the formality of the gesture in this simple place that had already become their home. Inside, the cabin was warm and welcoming, a fire having been laid in the hearth earlier that morning and kept burning by a neighbor who had agreed to check on it during the day. Lucas set Zara on her feet gently, suddenly uncertain despite the months of growing closeness between them. "I'll tend to the horses," he said, a habitual responsibility that gave him a moment to collect himself. Zara nodded, her own nervousness visible despite her smile. "I'll wait for you." When Lucas returned a short time later, having made sure the horses were settled comfortably for the night, he found Zara standing by the fire, her wedding dress exchanged for a simple white nightgown covered by a robe. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, the copper highlights catching the firelight in a way that took his breath away. "You're beautiful," he said simply, crossing to her with steps that felt both eager and reverent. She smiled up at him, her initial shyness giving way to the trust that had grown between them over the months. "And you, Lucas O'Malley, are the most handsome groom Elm Creek has ever seen," he chuckled, taking her hands in his. "I doubt that very much, but I'm grateful you think so." For a moment they stood there, hands clasped, on the threshold of this new intimacy. Then Zara rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his, a kiss that began as gentle as their earlier ones but quickly deepened with the knowledge that there was no longer any reason to hold back. Lucas gathered her closer, one hand moving to cradle the back of her head while the other rested at the small of her back. Her arms twined around his neck, her body molding against his with a rightness that felt like coming home after a long journey. When they finally parted, both were breathing more rapidly, eyes dark with desire too long denied. "Zara," Lucas murmured, her name a question and a plea all at once. "I'm yours," she whispered in return. "As you are mine, husband." The word, so simple and yet so profound, broke the last of Lucas's hesitation. With gentle hands, he lifted her into his arms once more, carrying her not across a threshold this time but to the bed they would now share as husband and wife. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, the fire burning low in the hearth, Zara traced idle patterns on Lucas's chest with her fingertips. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. Lucas captured her hand, bringing it to his lips for a tender kiss. "I'm thinking that for the first time in my life, I understand what it means to be truly home." Zara propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, her hair falling like a curtain of copper around her face. "And where is home, Lucas?" he smiled, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Wherever you are," he answered simply. "You and Danny." She leaned down to kiss him, her lips soft and warm against his. "That's a good answer, Mr. O'Malley." "The only true one, Mrs. O'Malley," he replied, still savoring the sound of her new name. They slept deeply that night, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that what had begun as a chance meeting a cowboy finding a child stuck in quicksand had blossomed into the family neither had expected to find but both had always longed for. Spring came to Nebraska with its usual capriciousness, warm days followed by sudden snowstorms, brilliant sunshine giving way to driving rain without warning. But by early April, the land had committed fully to renewal, with green grass pushing through the soil and wildflowers dotting the prairie in splashes of color that grew more abundant with each passing day. Life at the Marshall Ranch settled into a rhythm that suited the newly formed O'Malley family well. Lucas had indeed been promoted to head wrangler, a position that came with increased responsibility but also greater respect and slightly better pay. Zara's work at the dressmaker's shop had expanded to include designing simple gowns for the more fashion-conscious ladies of Elm Creek. Her natural talent for creating flattering silhouettes, earning her a reputation that spread to neighboring towns. Danny thrived in school and at home, growing inches seemingly overnight and developing a passionate interest in horses that Lucas encouraged with patience and pride. On weekends, father and son often rode together, Lucas teaching Danny the skills he would need to be a true horseman: how to read the land, judge weather, care for his mount, and handle himself in the saddle with confidence. Judith and Edward had become regular visitors to the small cabin, their initial condescension giving way to genuine respect as they witnessed the success of Zara and Lucas's unconventional marriage. Edward, true to his word, had begun discussing potential land purchases with Lucas, offering to help secure favorable terms from the bank when the time came for them to establish their own ranch. As May approached, bringing with it the first anniversary of Lucas and Danny's fateful encounter in the Quicksand, Zara shared news that completed their happiness. She was expecting a child, due to arrive in late autumn. The announcement was met with jubilation from Danny, who immediately began campaigning for a brother, and quiet joy from Lucas, who found himself overcome with emotion at the prospect of a child of his own blood joining the son of his heart. "Are you pleased?" Zara asked him privately that night after Danny had gone to bed, his head filled with dreams of teaching his future sibling to ride and rope. Lucas gathered her close, one hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her stomach where their child grew. "More than pleased," he assured her. Grateful beyond words, she smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I never thought I'd have this again: a complete family, a child on the way, a future full of promise. After James died, I thought that part of my life was over. I never thought I'd have it at all," Lucas admitted. "A drifter doesn't dare dream of roots this deep." Zara turned in his arms to face him directly. "Are you ever sorry that you stopped drifting?" Lucas shook his head without hesitation. "Not for a single moment. The only regret I have is that it took me 32 years to find my way to you and Danny." "Better late than never, Cowboy," she teased gently. "Much better," he agreed, kissing her with a tenderness that still amazed him. That this capacity for love had been within him all along, merely waiting for the right moment, the right woman, the right child stuck in quicksand to bring it to the surface. As they prepared for bed, Lucas found himself drawn to the small window that faced east, toward Fort Kearny where their journey had begun. The stars were bright in the clear spring sky, the same stars he had followed for years in his solitary travels across the Western Territories. But now, instead of guides pointing the way to the next destination, they seemed to him like benedictions, silent witnesses to the miracle of a man who had found his true home not in a place, but in the hearts of those who loved him. Behind him, Zara moved about the cabin, her presence a comfort and a joy even when she was merely performing the simple tasks of readying their home for the night. On the small table beside their bed lay the silver locket he had given her for Christmas, now containing a proper photograph of the three of them taken in town the previous month. Soon, Lucas thought with quiet wonder, they would need a new photograph to accommodate the fourth member of their family. "Coming to bed?" Zara asked softly, breaking into his reverie. Lucas turned from the window, taking in the sight of his wife, her hair loose around her shoulders, her nightgown flowing over the gentle curve of their growing child. "Yes," he said, crossing to her with steps made certain by love. "I'm coming home." And as he gathered her in his arms, Lucas O'Malley, once a solitary drifter with no fixed destination, knew with absolute certainty that he had found, at last, the place where he truly belonged. In this small cabin on the Nebraska prairie, with the family he had never expected but now could not imagine living without. The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising to the O'Malley family. In November of that first year of marriage, Zara gave birth to a healthy son they named James Lucas O'Malley, honoring both Danny's father and his new one. Danny, now 8, took his role as big brother seriously, proudly showing off the baby to anyone who would look and declaring that he would teach little Jamie everything he knew about horses and cattle when he was old enough. The following spring, with Edward Taylor's assistance, Lucas and Zara purchased a small ranch of their own, 200 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, located just 10 miles from Elm Creek. The property included a modest house larger than their cabin at the Marshall Ranch, with enough bedrooms for their growing family and space for Zara to set up a proper sewing room where she continued to take in work from Mrs. Foster's shop. Lucas divided his time between working their own land and continuing as head wrangler for Mr. Marshall, until they had enough cattle and horses of their own to sustain the family. It was exhausting work, but the pride of building something that would belong to their sons and any future children they might be blessed with made every long day worthwhile. By the time Jamie was 3, the O'Malley Ranch was established enough that Lucas could leave his position with the Marshalls and focus entirely on their own operation. That same year brought another joyous addition to the family, a daughter they named Sarah Elizabeth, whose arrival was heralded by 10-year-old Danny as perfect, because now we have one of each, and greeted by 3-year-old Jamie with a mixture of curiosity and proprietorial pride in his role as no longer the youngest. Life was not without its challenges. There were difficult years when drought made the grass sparse and water precious, when cattle prices fell and expenses mounted, when illness swept through the household, leaving everyone weak and worried. But through it all, the foundation remained solid, the love between Lucas and Zara that had begun with a chance encounter and deepened with each passing season. The bonds between parents and children that grew stronger through shared work and play. The connections to community and extended family that provided support when needed. Danny, growing into a young man with his mother's determination and his stepfather's quiet strength, showed a natural talent for working with horses that Lucas encouraged. By 15, he was breaking and training colts not just for their own ranch but for neighbors as well, earning a reputation for patience and skill that spread throughout the county. Jamie, sturdy and practical like his father, preferred cattle to horses, and showed an early aptitude for the business side of ranching that surprised and impressed Edward Taylor, who began including the boy in discussions about markets and investments during family visits to Elm Creek. Sarah, with her mother's copper hair and her father's thoughtful eyes, revealed artistic talents that manifested first in helping Zara with her sewing and later in sketching the landscapes and animals of the ranch with remarkable accuracy for one so young. As the children grew, so did the ranch. Lucas added acreage when neighboring properties became available, improved their stock with careful breeding, and invested in modern equipment that made the work more efficient if no less demanding. Zara's sewing business evolved into a small but profitable enterprise, producing ready-made clothing that was sold in shops as far away as Omaha, managed now with the help of 2 local women she had trained herself. Throughout these years of growth and change, Lucas and Zara remained each other's center, their love deepening with shared experiences, challenges overcome together, and the joy of watching their children thrive. The nightmares that had once troubled Lucas's sleep grew increasingly rare, replaced by dreams of future possibilities and contentment in the present. On the 15th anniversary of their wedding, with Danny now 23 and working alongside Lucas as a full partner in the ranch, Jamie 12, and already showing signs of the man he would become, and Sarah 9 and the undisputed darling of everyone from her father to the ranch hands, Lucas and Zara rode out alone to a special place on their property, a small rise overlooking the creek where wildflowers grew in particular abundance. "Remember the first time we came here?" Zara asked as they spread a blanket on the grass for an impromptu picnic. "When we were deciding whether to buy this land," Lucas nodded, smiling at the memory. "You said you could already see our children playing by that creek, and now they do." "Dreams have a way of coming true when you work hard enough for them," Zara observed, arranging the food she had packed: fried chicken, biscuits, apple pie on the blanket between them. Lucas looked at his wife, still beautiful at 42 with threads of silver now mingling with the copper in her hair, laugh lines at the corners of her eyes that he had helped put there. "Some dreams you don't even know to dream until they're right in front of you," he said softly. Zara met his gaze, understanding in her eyes. "Like a wandering cowboy finding a family he never expected." "Exactly like that," Lucas agreed, reaching for her hand. 15 years ago today, you made me the happiest man in Nebraska when you became my wife. I'm even happier now, Zara O'Malley." She squeezed his fingers, her smile warming him as it had from the beginning. "And I'm happier too, Lucas O'Malley. Who would have thought that Quicksand could be the foundation for such a good life?" Lucas laughed, the sound echoing across the land that was now truly their home. "Not me. But I'm grateful for it every day." As they shared their anniversary meal in the spring sunshine, watching the wildflowers sway in the gentle breeze and the creek flow steadily on its course, Lucas reflected on the journey that had brought him here from a solitary drifter haunted by his past to the center of a loving family, rooted in land of his own. It had begun with an act of courage pulling a frightened child from quicksand, but it had continued because of choice, because each day he had chosen to stay, to build, to love even when it was difficult. And in that choosing, he had found not just a family he never expected, but the man he was always meant to be. "What are you thinking?" Zara asked, noting his thoughtful expression. Lucas smiled, returning to the present moment and the woman who had made it all possible. "I'm thinking that for a man who spent half his life running away, I got remarkably lucky when I finally stopped." "We both did," Zara replied, leaning over to kiss him softly. "And we have many more years of luck ahead." As they rode back to the ranch later that afternoon, side by side as they had been for 15 years, Lucas O'Malley knew with absolute certainty that she was right. The future stretched before them, filled with work and challenges, yes, but also with love and family and the deep satisfaction of building something lasting together. Not bad, he thought, for a cowboy who had simply been passing through.